from Peasley Neighborhood Center, which is based in Over the Rhine. And some of the work that we've been doing around development and neighborhoods specifically grew out of our experience at Peasley and our family's experience in Over the Rhine, especially with a lot of the financial investment that Over the Rhine has seen over the years, but with the inequalities that our families and families that have been displaced from the neighborhood have experienced with all of this financial investment coming into the neighborhood. So with that, over the last 20 years, there's kind of been a mass influx of capital, of development into the neighborhood. And with that, it hasn't benefited the neighborhood people that were already there. So we've seen a loss of public space. We've seen a loss of community anchors that oftentimes lower income people depend on. And we've seen a mass loss of affordable housing within our neighborhood. And so with the investment of Over the Rhine, a lot of what happened in Over the Rhine related to many other urban neighborhoods is a lot of public-private partnerships. So it's like the public backing private developments for the success of the project with our public benefits, so such as tax abatements, public land, zoning changes, which benefit the private developers on their profit margins, but oftentimes we've seen do not benefit the community in which they're putting these projects in. And so with that kind of experience and the experience that we've seen from our families and the experience we've seen firsthand at Peasley, we set out to kind of bring more transparency to the process when we're thinking about these using public dollars and public incentives and public subsidies for private market development. And so with that, we created what we call the Equitable Development Rubric. And the rubric is pretty much a framework it's a framework for policy for kind of a path to think through our incentives for our public-private partnerships. So the basis of this framework is what we call a rubric, which is pretty much a scorecard, which is based on 4 main categories on housing affordability, jobs and labor, community input, so how the community is engaged in the development process, and something that we call community footprint, which is basically an anti-displacement effort to think about when you're bringing these projects, what's currently on the site, does that have benefit to the community? Is it serving some purpose to the community? And then how is what you're bringing going to impact what's currently on the site? And so kind of with those 4 categories, those are the main things that we think are of the highest importance when we think about our public dollars and our public subsidies backing private development, especially when we're thinking about things such as tax abatements or public land, which is a limited resource, and once it's gone for private development, it's very difficult to receive that type of subsidy back, or rather a zoning change, which oftentimes pads the profit margin. What type of things can the community receive from those subsidies that we're giving out? So when we're thinking about the type of kind of segregated society that we live in, what are things that we can do that don't displace people, that don't contribute to gentrification within our neighborhoods, that don't use up our public resources to not benefit the public and the community that it's currently in. So with that framework, our hope is we're currently on a grassroots effort. So our grassroots effort consists of rallying around neighborhoods and allowing them to bring more transparency to the process on the ground when developers are in front of them. So I'm thinking through specifically at community council levels, we have different supportive pieces such as our rubric as well as what we call a developer checklist that kind of ask for more transparency in when developers are approaching community councils for support of things such as a zoning change or a liquor license. So when we think about the fact that developers will come to neighborhoods and ask for a letter of support for these developments, and oftentimes they're seeking public subsidies like a tax abatement or a zoning change, but then they bring no transparency about what type of subsidies they're seeking or what specifically the rents are going to be or what's currently on the site. We aim to build up community power and community support to bring transparency into those efforts. But the hope is that through this grassroots pressure, we're able to pressure our decision makers to have a larger policy and to implement this into law, that it is necessary for the city to maintain those agreements between the community and the developer rather than having all of that weight currently on communities and using up community resources, rather that be a city, city maintained and city enforced and required. So with that, we're currently asking people, wherever they are, that they can kind of get support this type of framework. We have it on an individual basis to where people individually can bring it to organizations that they're associated with or share with other people or their social circles that they're connected with. And we're looking for specifically organizational endorsements. So if you're connected to an organization that is concerned about equity and gentrification or the way that your neighborhood is being developed, we're asking for any type of support, so through a letter of endorsement. And then we're also asking for endorsements from community councils. We've been working with different community councils at different levels of investment, specifically for the endorsement of the rubric. So saying that this is a good policy, we believe that this framework is good and should become city policy. And then also we have different community council-based tools to bring more transparency to the community councils when they have decisions in front of them asking for support. So those are kind of the different ways that people can get involved, and we're hoping that through grassroots pressure, it will pressure decision makers that a better way, especially when using our public subsidies and our public resources, is possible, and to bring more community benefit rather than using our public subsidies in ways that disadvantage oftentimes the people that are on the margins kind of society. And so that's kind of our equitable development rubric in a nutshell. The kind of packet that I passed out is a little bit of a breakdown of just kind of our rationale behind it, the approach of our actual tool, and then what eventually the demands of the city are and kind of what we're pushing. And then also included in that is just ways that people can get involved on any level, whether it be an individual, a part of an organization, or related to their community council. So I'm not sure. Yeah.
Now, what community councils have you had sort of extensive dealings with at this point?
So far, Walnut Hills has endorsed the framework of the rubric and is using it when developers approach them for support. And then we've also been involved in Evanston and Spring Grove Village, who are currently in neighborhood plan status. And so they're looking at the requirements of the rubric and kind of involving those in their neighborhood plan formats. We've been connected to Northside, Over the Rhine, West End, Lower Price Hill, and I think that's everything so far. Madisonville, yeah, we've been kind of associated with Madisonville, but not really connected to their community council. So those are kind of our main ones so far that I can think of. Are there other questions or places?
So your thought is this would yield affordable housing units, for example, as kind of a place to point yourself?
Yeah, it's kind of on a, not only affordable housing, but when we think about the profit that is a result of oftentimes things like tax payment or not having to pay for land, what kind of community benefit can we get from that? So one is like on-site affordable housing units. Another is like living wage jobs, not only in the construction, but also if there's commercial space in the whatever type of commercial space goes in after. And then also, we believe that all should be based in like good community input and transparency with the community and the neighborhoods that they're bringing the projects to. So it's kind of like a weight, because sometimes it may be more difficult for areas that, or organizations that are dedicated to affordable housing to maybe do the higher living wage jobs. And so if they're bringing some, like, it kind of allows for flexibility within the type of benefits to the community that they're bringing. So that's the hope with the different categories. And then there's also places for extra credit. So we believe that no matter what neighborhood it's going in, that all neighborhoods should receive at least a 50% score out of the 4 main categories. And then there's opportunities for extra credit. So that includes diversity and inclusion, local enterprise, environmental standards. And so those are kind of like extra places that you could pick up points. I guess I didn't mention this part, but the hope is that oftentimes these subsidies are going in neighborhoods that don't necessarily need the subsidies, so neighborhoods where the market is already cranking and up and running. And so the hope is to allow there to be equality in all of our neighborhoods, so whether that be neighborhoods that may have seen years of disinvestment that are asking for market investment, but they shouldn't be forced to receive any type of investment in their neighborhood. Like, we should be raising the standard citywide regardless of your level of investment in your neighborhood. But we do believe that more invested neighborhoods should have higher standards when we're giving away our subsidies in those areas for market development.
Is there have you all approached members of council with this yet, or is there a goal to, at some point, after getting a certain number of community councils to, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, there's been interest from community councils in kind of like our framework and the research that we've been doing. That hasn't necessarily been our first approach to go to community council, because mostly we're afraid that whatever we present will be watered down into something that's more passable. So we do want to make sure that we have that grassroots support, that after we have that kind of documented support from different community councils and a breadth of organizations, then we do plan to take it to city council as a framework for policy. So,
About how many given projects on an annual basis are there in any given year?
about how many projects? Ooh, I'm not sure. The last time I saw, looking at the Cincy Insights website, specifically related to Over the Rhine and related to tax abatements, it was about $37 million in tax abatements just in Over the Rhine. That was foregone for development, but as far as the city, I'm not exactly sure on that number.
Well, I mean, if you're going to council, I mean, if your scorecard to be filled out, about how many different projects do you expect it will have an impact on or could have an impact on?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure as far as a specific number of projects it could have an impact on. The hope is that it'll ratchet down the number of abatements that we do give because we're raising the standard. So right now it's almost an expectation that a project gets a tax abatement in the city of Cincinnati and without any type of requirements or any type of standards which the developer is held to. So the hope is that with this type of tool, it will ratchet down those abatements that we give out, and the abatements that we do give out, they would bring benefits to the community. So I don't know if I have a specific number.
So on the number, if I could,